It's really about being brave in certain instances because nobody wants to be the person that made that campaign that tanked. But everybody wants to be that person that made something really incredible.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Kevin from Play It Back. Now, if you've been following the series, you know what it's all about. Stories of the best, most out-of-the-box creative work out there. I love to dig into these case studies, and I started Play It Back to do just that. To tear down the best campaigns, concepts, and ads, and study why they worked. Also study why they could work better. The focus was, and is going to continue to be, about the work, the ideas, the creative execution. But something was missing from that. The people behind the work. I've done about 20 of these episodes, but I'm psyched to share this next evolution of this, where I'm going to sit down with some of my favorite creatives to talk about their favorite creative work, starting right now. In this episode, you're going to hear from Thig Gishuru, who's the creative director at Zulily. He is one of the most thoughtfully and intentionally creative people I've ever met. One question that I've gotten a lot over the last couple of years, and that I think every marketer or creative will get at some point in their career is, do we need to do a rebrand? And if so, to what extent? This is something that Thig just went through at Zulily. So we sat down to talk about that process, from decision to execution. So enjoy and stay tuned for more of these conversations with the most creative people I know from marketing, advertising, entertainment, and business. Welcome to Play It Back. All right, welcome back to Play It Back. I'm sitting here with Thig Gishuru, creative director for Zulily. Thig, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's good to see you.
We've known each other for a long time now, but never really talked about work.
A long time.
So I'm excited to chat with you about what you do, and specifically about a rebrand that you did recently, or rebrand refresh that you did recently at Zulily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. We've known each other for a long time and sort of like different industries, but both sort of in the marketing world. So
yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of overlap in our interests and the things that we go through and deal with and try to accomplish at work. So I'm happy to have this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, currently I'm creative director at Zulily, and I lead our creative team there. But generally speaking, my path to this role, I think, is the unconventional, untraditional path. I think many creative directors go through the path of going to a visual arts school, becoming a designer, then art director, and working up to creative director. And my path was a bit different. I specialized in business in college. Being the child of immigrant parents, education is always something that was stressed to me. Really following the traditional path of becoming a doctor or a lawyer or working in finance. Something like that. So that was sort of ingrained in me early on. But as far as what I'm really interested in and what drives me as a person, it's always been creative things. It's always been music, photography, fashion, content in general. And so those are always things that I sort of relegated to my to side hustles. But there became a point, I think, early on in my professional career where I wanted to make the shift from passion projects and hobbies to actually forging and creating a real professional career from creative and the creative things that I do. The biggest challenge for me, I think, was not having that background that most art directors or creative directors have. So the way that I combated that was by creating projects and partnering with other brands, other creatives, doing a lot of pro bono work. That strategy was successful for me and ended up parlaying a lot of those creative projects into a role at Nordstrom and then T-Mobile. Then I experienced the agency world, working at Publicis, as well as Ox Creative, and eventually landed where I am now, which is creative director at Zulily, where I oversee and lead our creative team of designers, copywriters, and project managers.
So I love the kind of the different paths people take to get where they are, especially in the creative field, because it all comes from a different type of inspiration, I think.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I think my experience and background in music, for example, right? Like music is all about taking different elements and instruments and people and putting them together to create a piece of art and a body of work. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned from making music as far as collaboration goes and teamwork and feedback and how you work together and ultimately accomplish making a song or an album.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like we should probably touch on that.
knew of you before I ever met you because of your work with the physics and music in the Seattle scene, especially. But talk a little bit about how that's impacted your career as a creative in the professional world too.
Absolutely. It's funny. I've performed, in front of hundreds and at times thousands of people, and little did I know during those performances that was preparing me for this next phase of life. When I'm presenting in front of stakeholders or in front of a VP or executives, there are a lot of translatable skills that go from being a performer and making music to this creative professional world. So there are skills that I've learned there that served me well. And, as I mentioned earlier, just the process of being creative and creating. Something that I love about music is that there isn't a lot of pressure when you're in the studio and you're creating something. You're not thinking about, oh, I want this to be a hit, or you're not thinking about the KPIs that you this particular piece of art or body of work or a song to have. You're just in the moment. You're creating.
How does it feel, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's about gut feeling, and to me, there's nothing funner than that. So I try to bring that feeling, that element of creativity, and being in the moment. I try to bring that to my creative work. And
awesome.
I think it gives me a good balance.
As an outsider, it feels like through all the partnerships and different types of people that you work with in the music industry, that skill particularly is transferable really well into a creative direction role where you're managing a lot of external and internal stakeholders and working with folks.
It's that different collaboration, whether you're collaborating with the trumpet player or the venue manager or the business manager or the tax person. It's really like learning how to navigate the different areas, the different roles, and work towards a common goal.
So we talked a little bit about what got you into creative work. What's inspiring you right now? Your job is to inspire people to interact with a brand and buy product, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what's inspiring you right now? What's got your creative juices flowing?
Yeah. So, this might sound kind of corny, but like my son, actually, my 6-year-old Noah, inspires me. I'll tell you a little bit more. In the marketing world, like my job is to build creative that cuts through the noise and stands out and makes someone look at it and say, well, what is that? Remember it. And we tend to sort of get caught up in these boxes and these silos and these processes that we've been doing for a long time. And sometimes we fail to question, like, hey, why are we doing it this way? And is there a different way that we can do it? And so I think about my son, his personality. He's such a creative and artistic person at heart, from the way that he gets dressed to the way that he does art, to the way that he does his homework, and everything about the way that he moves. It feels like an intentional expression of who he is. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, actually, we were heading out to go to a basketball game. And as you know, having kids, like leaving the house it's a chore. It's a chore. And things can go left real quick.
Yeah. It's a chore and it's a negotiation.
Exactly.
And it's,
So speaking of negotiation, he's putting his shoes on, and I look over and I notice he has one shoe. It's like a Nike Jordan 1. It's like black and yellow. The other shoe is a high top, but it's like a white canvas shoe that he just sort of like wrote on. It's like made some art. I'm like, hey Noah, can I help you? Looks like you got two mismatched shoes there. And he's like, oh no, I meant to do it that way. And I was like, so you want to wear like the Jordan on the left hand and then the generic nondescript shoe on the other foot? He's like, yeah. All right. So it's small things like that, right? Like me personally, like I like to wear shoes that match, right?
that are the same.
But at the same time, if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, if I'm somewhere so-and-so and I see this kid comes in, he's got like this Wednesday t-shirt on, Letterman's jacket and jeans on, look at the shoes, I'm like, oh, interesting. Wouldn't have done that, but that's interesting. And it stands out, and maybe they'll remember him for that. So it's like small things that sort of remind me over the course of the day to question what we all take for granted as standard, or this is what it is, and question more of like, why do we do it this way? Mm-hmm. And is there a different way to do it? And if there is, maybe that's something that we should explore. So it's that sort of thought that I try to bring to my creative teams and conversations as we're working through different projects and goals and objectives. It's, taking a step back to say, okay, we're doing it this way, but is there a different way that we
Yeah.
do it?
Why are we doing it this
Why
way?
are we doing
Is there a
it?
better way?
Yeah, and it's really, I think, about being brave
Hmm.
in certain instances, because nobody wants to be the person that that made that campaign that tanked, that
Right.
bombed. But everybody wants to be that person that made something really incredible, that did cut through the noise and make a statement. But oftentimes,
Which you can't do by playing safe.
exactly. Oftentimes, in order to really do that, you have to be brave and take a chance and do something that might terrify you a little bit. So I'm trying to bring a little bit more of that into my creative process.
I love it. No one braver than a 6-year-old too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No one braver, no one more confident.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Noah's now my inspiration too.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great answer. Well, it also, I think that segues nice into what we're here to talk about today, which is the Zulily brand refresh that you did.
Coming into this role, one of the things that really excited me about being creative director for Zulily was I felt that there was a lot of improvements to be made. I felt like I could really make an impact on this company. As the creative director, like, my job is to really ensure cohesion, and that who we are reflects our brand identity, our positioning, and what we strive to do. I think there are various ways that you can evaluate a brand to look and try and determine whether or not it's in need of a refresh. In this case, I didn't feel like Zulily needed a complete overhaul, but I felt like we were in need of a refresh. And there's a couple of reasons specifically that made me feel that way. Number one was just from like an aesthetic standpoint. I felt like our look and feel was a bit outdated. I think it felt right a few years ago, but things change so rapidly that you really need to be looking at your brand every couple of years, really. So I felt like there were some elements that were outdated. I also felt, from a process standpoint, standardization to help our creative teams. So, an example of that is, I think, as our creative teams were working through campaigns and ideas for campaigns, we were pulling from every single color under the sun, every single style, different mediums. And that's all great exploration, but it's also time.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I think constraints are helpful for teams. So I thought that this would be a great opportunity for me to give more constraints to my team as far as how we're going to rein the brand in a bit. We're going to limit it to this number of colors, this number of design elements, to help us spend less time during the process. But also, I think it's helpful for teams often to have constraints.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So if you were giving somebody advice on when to consider a rebrand, I think I've been through a few in my career on the B2B side. So it's, first of all, it's less high stakes. I think B2B in general does not focus on brand the same way, which that's a mistake, but that's a whole other conversation. But also there's an element of playing it safe.
Yeah.
For a lot of B2B brands. But one question that I've gotten from internal stakeholders, folks I've talked to in the space, people I mentor, that kind of thing, is, when is that appropriate? When should you be thinking about conducting a rebrand? And you talked a little bit about your process and what Zulily needed. What are some of the main things people should look out for there?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, take a look at your brand and ask yourself, does this brand identity still reflect our purpose and our mission and what we want to do with the brand? If it doesn't, that's a big sign that you're in need of some sort of refresh. As I mentioned earlier, a big question for me was, does this feel current and relevant still visually? And to me, it didn't. So that's another question. The process thing is huge as well. I think it's really about aligning with the brand externally, but also internally. Another piece to the sort of externally is, I think, looking at your competitors and people in your landscape. Timo, for example, who years ago, when we created the set of brand guidelines that we followed before this refresh, that company was not, I don't even think they were around.
Yeah.
They've grown tremendously now, and they are a big factor, and I think one of our competitors. So if I was to look at that brand and notice that, hey, they're actually look and feel very similar to us, that would be a sign to me that, okay, maybe we need to differentiate.
Be easily recognizable. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about the process and what goes into a brand refresh like this. I think especially for a brand like Zulily, there are a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, a lot of assets that are created on a daily basis.
Yeah. Answering this question could easily take an hour in itself, so I'll try to keep it short. But for our refresh, it included refreshing things like color, topography, photography, brand positioning, voice and tones, a lot of elements. So for me, the first step was really to put together a team of individuals that I felt really comfortable with leading and collaborating with on this process.
So did you have someone who owned each piece of that, basically?
Yeah. Okay. I actually had one large team that I put together, and then I had mini teams. So I had a small teams, like 3, to work on refreshing our color strategy. I had a team of 4 to work on refreshing our actual visual design elements strategy. So I had small teams, and so within those small teams, they collaborated and worked together and talked through this refresh and what it could look like. And then we would all come together as a larger group, and each team would sort of present their rationale, their stance, their recommendation, and we would just have a discussion about if that's the right call and why and why not. And so we had a few rounds of those for each different section and team. And it was really through that process that I think we all gained clarity about where we're trying to take the brand, and what we need to do to get there.
Yeah, man, that shared understanding, I think, is overlooked a lot, where you'll put together a strike team or an individual person, and they own something and are taking it from start to finish. But getting that buy-in and getting people along for the ride is so important with any project, but something like this.
Absolutely. And it was a great learning lesson for me as a leader too, because going into this, I had my vision for what I felt would be the visual expression of this brand. But through the conversations with my art directors and my designers and my copywriters, there were times in which they changed my mind.
Yeah.
They presented a stance and a recommendation based on their research and exploration that they were passionate about. And in many cases, they won me over. And so it was a real collaborative effort. And, I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of talented creatives.
That's awesome. That says a lot about the culture you've cultivated too, that people feel that sense of safety that they can bring those things up and have that disagreement with you too.
Again, I think my background helps here. I think I'm someone who's traditionally been somewhat of a generalist, and I can dabble pretty well in different areas, whether it's copy or design. But that also makes me very open-minded, because I never claim to know it all. But I do think that I'm very well at cultivating a culture of collaboration where everyone has a voice. I want to hear everyone's recommendation, as long as there's thought and strategy behind it. I think it's valuable.
Yeah. How do you manage decision paralysis with something like that, where there's so many voices, and obviously these are all folks you need along for the ride and to get their input. But when it comes down to making those decisions, sometimes you just have to make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it's hard and it's challenging, because that came up a few times, right? And I think the way that I make that ultimately is by looking at the end goal, the goal of what we want the brand to be. And honestly, trusting my gut.
Yeah. Good call. And sometimes that's all it boils down to is I think this is the right path. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
If it's not, we'll figure it out later.
Absolutely. And I think where that came into play most, you mentioned this earlier in reference to B2B brands, but it's sort of that the desire or inclination to just sort of play it safe.
Yeah.
And I think where I had the most, internal struggle or contemplation during this process was in moments where I looked at something like color strategy, for example, and thought to myself, am I playing it too safe? Or should I stretch a little bit? At the end of the day, I'm going to need to explain to my CMO or the CEO why I made this decision.
Yeah. And I would imagine as a company like Zulily, that has an invested and passionate customer base, there's a desire to play it safe among a lot of the executives, a lot of the company, to stick with what's worked in the past and trust that that's going to work again. So challenging some of those creative barriers got to be tough.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's even amplified tenfold now.
Yeah, interesting.
We're in a recession, particularly for retail. Retail's been crushed the last couple of years, coming off the heels of the pandemic. So every retail brand out there right now is struggling with driving more demand, and every retail brand out there has the fear of doing something wrong that's going to tank the brand. Yeah. So that apprehension, that pushback from the top is amplified even more, and it's going to come, which just puts the onus on me to really just ensure that what I'm recommending and what I'm pushing for is strategic and thoughtful, and does have a way of ultimately benefiting the brand.
Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about the kind of the internal feedback loops and bringing the team along for the ride, getting the right inputs there. When do you bring, whether it's focus groups or customer data, into the process? Is that kind of infused throughout from the jump?
Yeah, absolutely. So for this particular project, we actually had some customer data, actually external and internal. So we had external feedback from customers about our website and our user experience. And then we also had feedback from internal teams about it as well. So early on at the very beginning, that's data that we took into account. I also conducted stakeholder feedback specifically about
nice.
Look and feel, because I wanted to get the thoughts and opinions of those at the top. And then we conducted some competitor and market analysis to take a look at what other brands are doing, what they're doing that's working, what they're doing that's similar to us, what they're doing that's different. And that was also a really helped us create a really solid foundation before we even started any work for what we wanted to do. As far as bringing people in, I would say we made sure to give ourselves a good amount of time to explore and work through the different pieces of this refresh before we presented anything to anyone. But eventually we did, and we brought in some members of the creative team who were not involved in the refresh. And then we brought in a couple of external stakeholders as well to get feedback. So that was helpful as well. That can always go left.
Yeah, that's so true. Refresh put into place, started rolling out and updating the bill of materials across the board. How did it go? How have you measured success? How have you decided whether things worked, things didn't, things needed to change?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. It's still going, but so far, so good. I think due to the nature of our company, we're online shopping, so we have on-site assets, we have advertising assets, we have email, we have some print stuff, we have stuff everywhere.
Right.
So it's impossible to say, okay, on October 1st, we're going to hit that button and everything's going to be refreshed. But the slow rollout, there's some benefits to that because it gives my teams the opportunity to utilize and try and test out these new guidelines for some of the campaigns that we're working on. And it gives us the opportunity to identify if there are things that are not working. Okay, then maybe we should take a look at revising those. So far it's going great. As far as data to measure it, working on it, don't have it yet, but I can say it's been received really well internally from our executive leadership, from stakeholders. Customer feedback has been really, really positive as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. And I've looked through a bunch of the assets. I love the way it looks. I think you outlined in an article on LinkedIn what your thought process was and what the team went through there. I'll share that in the links of this episode. But really kind of strong connection to emotional drivers with the color palette and the different ways that you were approaching things, which just again in the B2B space, something that we don't make that connection a lot. So it was really cool to read through some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was honestly one of the funnest projects that I've worked on. I think where I bring value is really evaluating something, whether it's a brand or a project or a campaign, and really thinking about like, how can we take this to the next level and still serve the brand long term? So I think we've been able to do that, and I'm really, really excited about it.
Awesome. Well, love the work. Love what you've been doing. Love your music. And now I've got Noah as my creative inspiration here too. So
awesome.
Thanks for joining. Great to chat with you.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.